SwiftUI, at the end of the day, can you trust it or will it ghost you? So the thing is, SwiftUI can be like a cat. What I mean by that is that it has you running around and it can scratch your monitor in some cases, but it also cuddles up and it's very cute. So you might, like at the end of the day, you end up loving it because it's just so cute. SwiftUI is built for the future, and as you see with the Apple trends, like how Swift started and now it's moving to SwiftUI, every year they're adding a lot of features to it. They're like using it in their own applications. So it is what it will be in the future. Another thing is that once you had a taste of SwiftUI, there is actually no going back because it's just much easier to do it. I think it's worth it at the end of the day. Hi, I'm Zamzam. I've been working in iOS since 2015. I have worked in Iran and in Denmark, where I'm currently based. I work as a tech lead at a company called VO Technologies. So a little bit about VO is that VO has this sport camera, and our mission there is that we want to make sports technology accessible to all. So as you know, a lot of elite clubs, they have access to technology, whereas a lot of grassroots footballs or any grassroots sport don't have that technology. And in VO, we want to change that. So when I got hired at VO 2 years ago, in 2021, what we wanted to do was that we wanted to make a live game, because in VOCam 2, you can actually live stream your game. So we wanted to make a live application that then viewers can use the app to view the sport live. I only had a few months to build this application from start. And then I thought to myself, this is my chance to use SwiftUI. So like kind of now or never situation. So I made the choice to go with SwiftUI. It was iOS 14, so SwiftUI was still relatively new. And the thing was, since I didn't want to completely be hopeless if it didn't work out, I chose to go with UIKit navigation and then have SwiftUI as part of that. So that was the choice I made at that point. We released this app a year ago, and it's been in stores for the whole world. And for now, we have almost 500,000 users worldwide, and we have a crash-free rate of 99.4%. And the thing is that we have the overall rating of 4.7 with 13,000 ratings. So I think it kind of went good. So let's get to SwiftUI. To me, SwiftUI is like a box of chocolate. You never know what you're going to get, but you can always count on it to be sweet or bitter or both. So is SwiftUI more than a one-night stand, or what makes this framework swipe-worthy? So there is this declarative syntax, which makes the SwiftUI so it makes the SwiftUI sweet. SwiftUI uses this declarative syntax for building user interfaces, which is very different from the imperative approach used by UIKit. We have automatic layout, which means that unlike UIKit, SwiftUI automatically manages the layout for you. It manages the constraint and spacing between the views, and it makes it much easier to create a UI. It does make your development much faster in some cases, but it does make the developer much faster because there's a lot less code to write. There are no storyboards. And as Marin talked about, you can actually share UI when you're working with SwiftUI. So you can share your UI between multi-platforms of macOS, watchOS, tvOS, and all that. And it is kind of easy to learn, I would say. So declarative syntax, what does that mean? So why would you write code when your app can read your mind? So in declarative syntax, SwiftUI is a programming paradigm where the user interface is defined by describing the desired outcome. So rather than going through a step-by-step process of how your UI should look like, you can just use SwiftUI and it will kind of read your mind and make the app work for you. So what do I mean by that? So this is a SwiftUI text view. So you want a text view, and so you write a text field, and then you would want it to know the changes of this text field. So you have this state property that knows the changes of the text field, and then you want this to be a rounded border text field style, and there it is. So let's see how it looks in UIKit. So in UIKit, this is roughly the same result you get out of this, but then you have to say, okay, I want my text field to have this exact width and this exact height. I want it to be located in this in this location of the view. Then you had to add it to the view, and this is if you're coding your UI and you're not using the storyboard. And then you have to use the delegate, and then there is this text field and editing delegate, which then you would be able to know the changes of the text field. So yeah, so that's like a very simple comparison between SwiftUI and UIKit. Another thing is that SwiftUI has automatic layout. So automatic layout in SwiftUI refers to the framework's ability to dynamically adjust the layout of UI elements based on the size and orientation of the device. So without the need for explicit constraints or code. So it is kind of like your personal assistant who knows exactly where to put everything to make your app look good on all the devices. So you don't have to, like you could still run it on the different devices that you're supporting, but the bottom line is that you don't have to. It should just work. So this is like a very basic login view in SwiftUI. And like from a SwiftUI, from a login view, what you would expect is that you want to have a text field for the username or an email, and then you want to have like a field for a password. Then you would have a button that will then call your endpoint to call the login. And this is the code for SwiftUI. And this is the same result, but it's in UIKit. So you have to explain all the different things of different text fields. You have to make the constraints for them separately and make sure that it does actually work on all the different sizes. And then you have to have the delegate, and you have to have the action to actually get the action of the buttons. So you see there is a difference between SwiftUI and UIKit for a simple login view. So you see where we're getting at. So now you know why you can do faster development. So faster development in SwiftUI refers to the framework ability to streamline the app development process. So it will allow you to build your apps faster and more efficiently. With SwiftUI, declarative syntax, and automatic layout, you can just quickly build your UI. So it's like having a turbocharged sports car for building apps. Again, a SwiftUI for a list view. So when you want to have like a simple list in SwiftUI, and the examples here are very simple, but it's just mostly to get the point, is that so for a list view, you just have to write this amount of line of code, and you get a list view that has an image and a text. The same code in UIKit would look like this. So you would have to have a table view, you need to have the delegate and the data source, and then you need to make sure that you have a cell, then the constraints have to work, and then there is also a lot of things that you need to take care of in the line just to make that work. So you see how much less code you actually have to write with UIKit, with SwiftUI compared to UIKit. SwiftUI has live preview, which is a real time saver, but only in the cases that it actually works. When I started 2 years ago, I would say that I did not have a good experience with preview. It would always say not working, not reloading, so it didn't work out. But I know now it has come a long way, and when you're actually using it, it does save you a lot of time. So imagine that you're working on this list, and you just want to have a button like next to at the end of the line. So you can just write your code and see how it looks like on the preview screen. And the thing is, when you're working on a big project, the build and run is not happening so fast. I know people who are working on a project that will take them minutes to just comment or the project. So this will actually save you a lot of time when you're making like tiny bits of UIs that you just want to see how it will look like. So no storyboards. Marin mentioned that. But it is actually, it was a very painful process. If you were working on storyboards, multiple people, it was almost impossible to not face conflicts. And when you faced conflicts, it was almost impossible to resolve them. And then people would end up saying that, okay, we don't need to use a storyboard, but the storyboard was a lot easier to work with if you didn't have the conflict issue, rather than having to write all those lines of code. But anyway, you don't have that problem anymore. So you can embrace the power of SwiftUI's declarative syntax and enjoy a peaceful coding in a world where layout constraints and conflicts are a nightmare in the past. So Shareable UI, and finally, we can actually share UI between Apple ecosystem. So with SwiftUI, creating a shareable UI is as easy as spreading a rumor in high school. So just a few lines of code, and your UI gossip will spread like a wildfire across iOS, macOS, watchOS, and tvOS. So this is, again, a very simple list with 5 lines of code, and you can see that it will actually work in all of these platforms for you. Of course, if you want to make like macOS experience better, you would have to put in more code, but that doesn't mean that it doesn't work. So that's a huge difference between using SwiftUI and like going back and using AppKit or UIKit. SwiftUI is easy to learn. So SwiftUI is easy to learn because it's intuitive, it's declarative, and it focuses on describing what you actually want to achieve. So you don't have to specify everything in every little detail, but then you can just go around and learn to build SwiftUI views. And it doesn't take a lot of lines of code to play around with SwiftUI. Another thing which is really great, which I think I really like, is Apple documentation when it comes to SwiftUI. So Apple has some great docsy. As an iOS engineer, back in the days, when I ended up landing in Apple documentation, when I was searching for something, that was not the best experience because it wasn't always the easiest documentation to follow. Whereas this new documentation that Apple has made for SwiftUI, I think it's much better, and it is actually fun to go through it and learn about SwiftUI. So it has all these great features, but then why would you swipe left? So it is hard to build complex UI. I'm not saying that it's not possible or you cannot do it. You can do it, but it would be harder to do it. SwiftUI is growing old, which means that by every year we get a new SwiftUI, and then there are some things from the past that are deprecated. There are new things that are added. And then it does have incomplete feature set. So every year they're adding a lot of new features, but they're still not exactly the same as we had in UIKit. It does have tricky behavior. So it doesn't mean that in a lot of cases you would say, okay, it's a bug, but it's actually not a bug. It's just like you need to know what you're doing in your view, especially if you're using it with combine and add publish properties. You need to know what you're doing. Otherwise, it results in tricky behaviors. It has limited backward compatibility. You can just support backward until iOS 13. And every time you want to use the new things, you can only support that iOS forward. And then debugging is a hassle. So hard to build complex UIs. Building complex UIs with SwiftUI is like assembling IKEA furniture with just a toothpick and a rubber band. It is doable, but of course it's not the easiest approach, and you will be in for a lot of problem solving if you want your view to work out. And the reason for that is that, especially if you're coming from a UIKit mindset, then it becomes more difficult because you used to build your UI in a different way than you have to do it in SwiftUI. And maybe that's also make it harder because you have to change the way you think how you want to build the UI. SwiftUI is growing old. So what I mean by that is that many things have changed since 2019, and SwiftUI is growing. So iOS 15 have brought many changes in SwiftUI, and Apple has added a lot more modifiers to the new SwiftUIs. So this means that if you want to go back and support iOS 13 and 14, you need to do a lot of extra work. And it also means that if you want to support like other platforms, you also have to add more code. That is not necessarily a bad thing, but the thing is that you just have to know that this is going to be it. And if you're working on an app that you don't need to support iOS 13 and 14, then you don't have a problem. But if you want to support that, then it becomes difficult. So what's new in iOS 15? A lot of new modifiers have been added to iOS 15, and I'm not going to go through all of them. You can just Google it by yourself and learn what each of these modifiers are doing. But the thing is, a lot of the names that you're seeing here are not something that you wouldn't normally use. So for instance, you would use a searchable, you would want to use a refreshable, or you would want to have like a swipe actions in iOS 14. Why wouldn't you want that? But they're just not available there. And then there are some new things in iOS 16. And here are a list of that, which again, among those things, you see some features that you would really want to have in the older iOS versions, like grid view, location on tab gesture, multi-date picker, and the navigation, the new navigation stack and navigation split view, which basically, so the SwiftUI deprecated the old navigation view. So you need to use these two. So you might say, okay, why should I care? I mean, like, why would it be so difficult, so horrible to support the older iOS version? So let me paint you a picture here. So imagine you want to have, then we're back to our list again, you want to just have a list separator. For some reason, Apple engineers decided that if we are making a list in iOS 13 or 14, we would by default want to have a list separator. And that was just the assumption. So if you don't want to have the list separator in iOS 15, you can just write this dot list row separator dot hidden, and it will remove the separator. But if you use this exact code in iOS 14, it will show you this error, that it is not supported. OK, so what do I do now? Then you end up doing something like this, which is like, OK, if iOS 15 available, do this shiny new thing, remove the list separator with that. But since I still have to support iOS 14, then I have to make this very like hacky way of like removing the list separator. So, and this is just the way to do it. I know there are a lot of wrappers and fancy ways that you can remove these ifs and elses to another thing, but then at the end of the day, you're doing this anyway. So you have to know that. And this goes with all those things that you saw in iOS 15 and 16. So I think you got the picture here. I'm not going to make 100 examples of this, but that was going to be your life if you're supporting iOS 13 and 14. Incomplete feature set. As I said, they're adding a lot of more features to SwiftUI every year, but there is still some things that are missing from the SwiftUI. One of them, and it's like the question, is navigation management. So navigation management in SwiftUI 4 has changed and has made huge changes, but it still doesn't fit exactly to the things you had in UIKit. And in my case, I still haven't fully migrated my app to SwiftUI. That doesn't mean that it's not doable. It's just that means that I just postpone it and I'll deal with it later. Another thing is SwiftUI lacks a native equivalent to UIKit's collection view. I know from most UIKit developers, you love collection view because it does give you a lot of freedom. You can do all sorts of things with it. SwiftUI has lazy VS stack and lazy HS stack, but they do not offer the same level of customization and performance optimization. And SwiftUI has a text editor, which is for handling multi-line and scrolling text, but at this time, there is no ability to add formatted text inside a text editor view. Another thing would be a complex gesture recognizer. So doesn't mean that you don't have that, you do have it, but it's just not as you would expect it to be, because in UIKit, there was a lot more things you could do with gesture recognizers. Changing a status bar color, it might not be a big issue, but the thing is that you cannot do it with SwiftUI, and if you want to do it, you have to have a wrapper around the UIKit to make the SwiftUI work. And then, if you want to support iOS 13 or 14, well, think twice, because you might actually not want to do that, because it's a lot of extra work. And the thing is, all of this doesn't really mean that you shouldn't use SwiftUI, but it's just like if you want to use it, you need to know that it's like a superhero without their full arsenal of gadgets. It is still very, very powerful, but not quite as flashy. Okay, let's get to tricky behaviors. So it's like a GPS system that occasionally sends you down a dead-end road, leaving you scratching your head. So what I mean by that is that if you're using SwiftUI and because it automatically handles view update for you, then it means that you have to be very careful of how you're making your UI and how you're making use of these observable objects, because when your app grows and you're building complex UIs, then it becomes more important to know those things. So one of them is add publish. I think we all love it, the ones who are using it. It's great, it's very smart. You do a change and then it will automatically update your view. But the thing is, you need to be careful how you're using this, because changes to it can trigger update to your whole body. And then views will refresh unnecessarily, and it would be difficult to know that, because you wouldn't expect that some changes would just refresh your whole view body, but that it happens. So that's with the published property. Then there is this thing with the state object and observed object. And I know that in most cases there are not a lot of difference between them. So you could basically go around and using them without actually knowing what they mean, and like just ignoring the fact that they mean different things, because there is two of them. So they are both property wrappers used to manage and observe changes in objects conforming to an observable object protocol. So they both help facilitate SwiftUI's reactive data flow. But there's always a but, and that is that state object makes sure that you only have one instance of the object that is created and managed for the entire view hierarchy. However, the observed object does not manage the lifecycle of the observed object, which means it is used to observe and react to changes to observable object, but it needs to be created outside of view. So when you might ask, when should I use this one and when should I use the other one? So if you're using a state object, then you need to make sure that the observable object you're creating is within your view. Whereas the observed object is that if you're injecting this to other views down the line. So when the observed object has always to be injected, but the other one has to be created inside the view. And then we get to this other property wrapper, which is environment object. It is pretty cool because it is for data that should be shared with many views in your app. So SwiftUI gives us this powerful environment object property wrapper. This lets you share model data anywhere it's needed. But what you need to know is that when you're using the environment object, it will trigger a view update, even though your view is not using any reference to its properties. So if you're using an environment object, you need to use all of its properties. Otherwise, even if you're not using it, your view automatically updates if those properties changes. And then this is my personal favorite, timer. So it's like a very basic timer. I have a timer that runs every second, and every time that it runs, then it adds one to this state property that I have, and then it is shown in the UI. So it's nothing complex, very normal timer. And this is actually a very important and useful thing to use when you're debugging your SwiftUI view. What it does is that it actually prints every time your view updates, and it does tell you why it's updating. And the thing is, so I have a timer, and I wanted to see how often my view gets updated. The result is something like this. So every second, your whole view refreshes itself. And it's not a bug. It's apparently how it's meant to be. But if you don't know that, then you end up making other views inside that then they automatically update themselves every second. So that was like a bug. I had to go spend a lot of time to figure out why my view was updating a lot of time. So we talked about limited backward compatibility, but the fact is the majority of iOS users do update their iOS versions. So maybe at the end of the day, you shouldn't really care that much unless you have users who you know that they are using the older iOS versions. And debugging in SwiftUI is pretty hard in some cases. So it's the ultimate test of patience, sanity, and willpower. So these two are going to be your best friends when you're debugging SwiftUI views. So what it means that you would have to know why your view is updating, and these will actually help you to figure out why the SwiftUI view are update themselves every now and then. And this is a GIF which I really like, and it does show you how you have to go around when debugging a SwiftUI view. So, SwiftUI, at the end of the day, can you trust it or will it ghost you? So the thing is, SwiftUI can be like a cat. What I mean by that is that it has you running around, and it can scratch your monitor in some cases, but it also cuddles up, and it's very cute. So you might, like at the end of the day, you end up loving it because it's just so cute. SwiftUI is built for the future, and as you see with the Apple trends, like how Swift started and now it's moving to SwiftUI, every year they're adding a lot of features to it. They're like using it in their own applications, so it is what it will be in the future. I'm not saying that AppKit or UIKit are going anywhere, but I'm saying this is going to be the, like based on Apple, at least it's going to be here for a long time. Another thing is that once you had a taste of SwiftUI, there is actually no going back. So it happened to me that when I was working with SwiftUI, then I got handed over a complex view, and I was like, okay, I'm gonna do this in UIKit because it's complex. I'm not gonna do it with SwiftUI. I started up writing collection view and starting writing data sources and everything, and I was like, no, I'm not going to do this. I'm just gonna go and use SwiftUI because it's just much easier to do it. Of course, you might end up spending some time just to figure out and make it look like exactly what you want it to look like, but I think it's worth it at the end of the day. So here I've put some great resources. So Apple documentation, as I mentioned, Codeco docs are great for SwiftUI. They have a lot of videos and tutorials. And then Donnie, who you saw the talk earlier today, has also great articles and also Swiftly. So these are my favorite articles when I want to get myself updated on anything happens in Swift community. So making SwiftUI work for you is like a secret to a happy relationship. You have to be willing to compromise and always remember to bring a snack. Thank you.